What's my Yu-Gi Bros? I'm your host, the one, the only, the RJB0. Welcome to Wednesday Morning Yu-Gi-Oh! Today I wanted to bring you an in-depth tournament analysis from this last Saturday. I think that it's important when you go to a tournament not only to analyze the deck that you made, which I'm going to be doing, and making the deck profile, looking at what you built, but also thinking about how you played, how your analysis of the tournament was beforehand, and why things went the way they did, so that when you go to the next event, or when another player plays the same deck or is playing in a similar meta, you could be thinking about how you can improve yourself, how you can improve your ability to play against that meta, your preparation, and your understanding of the game. So I want to do a tournament analysis that is going to start with my talking about my preparation for the event. I'm then going to go into a couple of choices in the deck that I want to talk about when thinking about how I prepared for the event, and then I want to go into my matchups. I'm going to read off my matchups, and I am going to discuss a couple of important notes when it comes to how those games went, how I played, and how I can prepare for events in the future. So I want to start off with talking about my preparation before the event. One of the major things that defined this event and the way that I prepared for it was the fact that I didn't really have the ability to play against other players ahead of time. I still have not downloaded Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro for my new computer. I don't have a lot of access to competitive players in the area. There's one guy named Sam, who a couple of you from the Seattle area may know, who I got to test it with here in Bellingham about a week beforehand, but aside from that, it's largely just been down to the rest of my experience with this deck as a whole, not with any particular build of it, and my ability to test kind of against myself with proxies for ABCs, and of course testing ratios using hand tests and also using that Yu-Gi-Oh! Theorio Excel spreadsheet that I made. So when thinking about going to an event, the very first thing that you have to think about is what the meta is going to be like when you are going to be playing at that event. It wasn't until a couple of weeks before the event that I realized that the event actually was the day after ABC was released, which meant that I had to do a lot of last-minute scrambling. I think that I could have done much better and will do much better in the future with my preparing for the event in terms of understanding the meta, because if you don't know what cards are going to be available before the date of the tournament, then you aren't going to know what is available to play during the tournament and what you're going to be playing against. So that is something that I'm definitely going to work on in the future, is making sure that I know what I'm going to be playing against. And so it was a few weeks beforehand that I realized that I was going to be playing against ABC. I had the option to switch decks. It would have been a huge scramble, and I didn't really think about it. I didn't quite comprehend just how bad the matchup is for Mermails in theory against ABC, but in practice, once I got testing against the deck, once I had this build ready to go, it did a lot better than expected. So that was one thing. I had the option to switch decks, but I didn't. In retrospect, it's difficult to tell whether or not that was the right choice. I think that generally Magispectors should have a good ABC matchup, although we did not see any in the top tables at Seattle this weekend. That was the main deck that I was planning on potentially switching to in preparation for ABC. I'm kind of glad that I didn't, mostly because I would not have been able to finish it in time, but that was a big problem with my not knowing what the meta was until like 3 weeks beforehand, because I didn't give myself the time to make a new deck. So I was left with Mermails, which I was happy with because I just really enjoy the deck. But from a competitive standpoint, it's generally better to choose the deck that you think gives you the best chance at winning when you're going to a competitive event. When you're playing at locals, it's a different thing. But when you're going to something like regionals, unless you have your invite, unless you've already topped, it's generally best to play the deck you think is going to give you the best chance. It would also have been nice to have some side deck cards prepared ahead of time. I did not have Ghost Reaper or Winter Cherries at this event, and I only got access to one Solemn Strike. It ended up doing me a-okay in the end, but it was probably better for me to try and look for the side deck cards far in advance and be testing long before the event than right up to the last minute, because you're testing up to the last minute. Of course, you should be testing up to the last minute, but if you really just start your serious testing maybe a week or two before the event, then you're going to run into problems with access to cards. You know, ordering cards online takes time, and getting them through trading, you know, is a hassle. And so if you don't complete your deck to your fullest satisfaction, you know, if you do not have the cards that you found tested well, then you're going to be playing suboptimally at your regional. So those are a couple of things that I could definitely do better at the next event. So that was my pre-tournament analysis. I want to look into my deck now. In the main deck, there are only a couple of cards that I want to discuss. One of those is my omission of Pot of Desires. You'll notice that almost all of the Mermail players that have done well in the last weekend have been playing Pot of Desires. I made the conscious choice not to, although those players seem to be a-okay, you know, having banished potentially a Dragoons. They said that they never really got punished for it. I personally chose not to because I didn't want to spend the money on the card, which is a valid excuse, but is also something that you want to really critically analyze when you're going into an event, whether you're playing optimally if you aren't putting down the money to get the cards that you need for your deck. It is true that a lot of these cards cost money, but if you don't want to be really punished for that, you can always sell those cards right afterward, which was a lot of the logic with my putting in the money to make this deck, because I know that this deck is going to be very popular even after this event, and so I'll be able to sell it off in the future. So that was one of my concerns with Pot of Desires that I probably should not have had. I guess I was a little bit lazy about it. And the other thing was that I thought that I wanted Pot of Desires to be an earlier choice than it was. And what I mean by that is that I would have wanted to be able to play Pot of Desires before the rest of my plays, and I really didn't feel like I could. Other players, like I said, have not gotten punished for it, but that was the choice I made. I would test further in the future. I did briefly have access to a couple of them, which I tested with and I found that I didn't like, but I didn't test with them a huge amount. So I would have tested with Pot of Desires more. Salvage was a really interesting choice. I found that Salvage, while it was a part of Brick Hands, I think twice the entire tournament, I found that it really helped me out sometimes. And I would have liked, if I were to play it in the future, for it to have been much more consistent in my deck. I would have liked to have been able to salvage more often and access this more often. So I would probably, in the future, actually reduce the size of my deck and increase the number of salvages that I'm running. I absolutely loved the Undine that I was running because it improved the consistency of my deck. It improved the rate at which I drew, you know, the combination of a Dragoons access card and a Kaiju, because I could run ratios in my deck that, you know, law of large numbers made it more likely that I was going to draw into the cards, the kind of hand that I wanted without bricking too hard. Although I would definitely consider reducing the size of the deck and just trying to find ways to either play without Dragoons or to access it more quickly. That's a potential reason to be running Pot of Desires. But that was the choice that I made, and I was fairly happy with it. I would probably still, I think I would still play like this in the future. As far as analyzing the event beforehand, which is what I'm really talking about here because you've already had the deck profile, the one card that I'd like to really talk about being a really poor choice, kind of in retrospect, even though it helped me out a lot, was Interrupted Kaiju Slumber. One of the things you really have to be careful of is that sometimes things work in practice because you're lucky, but don't work in theory, and the theory is just as important in that case, because if you're playing a deck in multiple events, if the theory doesn't go, like if the theory isn't correct, and even if you got lucky in practice with it, you probably should not run that ratio, that combo, that set of cards. And that is definitely true of Interrupted Kaiju Slumber. I actually faced more decks at the tournament that were good against this card than decks that this card was good against. For instance, Blue Eyes and Metal Foes. I faced 3 out of my 9 games were Blue Eyes and Metal Foes. And those matchups are really bad for Interrupted Kaiju Slumber because you usually can't activate it against them because of Spirit Dragon's effect and because of Jougen. In the future, I would probably... It's really tough because I really like having access to the Kaiju. But I also, you know, this card also isn't good against a lot of matchups. I found myself siding it out. I would probably just run the one Slumber and maybe a Raigeki, or just take out the other one to make my deck smaller. What I didn't prepare for was the way that ABC played out at this event. ABC was very, very prominent, and it was 7 out of the 8 top decks at this tournament, at the top tables. So it was definitely very prominent, except it was very polarizing. Just about half of the ABC players dropped out after the first couple of rounds, and the other half went on to do very, very well. And so I found myself at the kind of middle to high tables, not playing against ABC and playing a lot of decks that people made meta calls with against ABC. And so that was something I wasn't really prepared for. I would say in the future you're going to be seeing a lot more ABC around events just because it's pretty easy to get the basic cards for it. So that was my deck analysis. I'd like to quickly talk about my matchups, because that's a big part of this tournament report, is understanding why this deck worked the way that it did, why I won and lost the games I won and lost, and what the matchups were that I played against. Keep in mind, as we're looking at this deck, I only played against one ABC deck the whole day, and my deck played as well as it could have against that deck. I didn't play. There was one move that was fairly suboptimal, but the thing that really killed it, I could not have possibly prepared for. So let's just get down to the tournament report. Round 1, I played against Zombie Synchro. I 2-0'd him. He summoned 1 or 2 Synchros both games, and I just steamrolled him. He tried to go into Beals because he thought that would block me out, but I had access to the instant fusion. In reality, that Beals would have been a little bit more difficult to get over without the instant fusion. I would have probably big-eyed it to my side of the field if I didn't have the instant fusion, because I did have access to the 2 Megalo. But that's how that went. The sportsmanship was really great at this event. I was really impressed with the sportsmanship that I saw. And this kid really tried to be a good sportsman about just watching me OTK him with like 19,000 points of damage one game and like a Moulin Glacia the next. It was a little bit painful to watch, but he was a great kid. Moving on to round 2, I 2-0'd Cosmo, which was in theory my worst matchup, but it went pretty well. I think it was just because I was able to dominate the board. The Kaiju were really helpful. System down was absolutely clutch. And I was, he could set up plays that would be able to grind through my plays normally if I weren't playing things like Salvage, and if I didn't have the number of resources that I had available and the type of resources I had available. One of the things that makes Cosmo a really tough matchup for Mermails is the fact that even once you get rid of one of their ships, they can get another ship, and then they can get a pilot, and that pilot can get another ship. It's very difficult to grind through for Mermails, and so being able to play things like Kaiju and being able to play System Down made that matchup a lot easier. So game 1, I started by clearing his board. I swung with Teus and Linde, and this was a huge misplay that I made next, because he only had 4,300 life points at this point, and I had the ability to put 32 on the board. I had an Atlantean in my grave that I thought was Marksman, so I went for instant fusion, and it turned out that it was Infantry, and so I actually couldn't do anything except swing with the Teus and the Linde that turn, and then my infantry got banished, and my instant fusion was essentially wasted. I still won the game because of interrupted Kaiju Slumber. He basically at that point paid himself down to 100 life points. I hit Slumber. I had a bigger Kaiju than he did. I swung for game. Game 2, I opened System Down, Twisters, Teus, Diva, into Neptabyss and Megalo, and I went for the Leo Moulin Glacia play. He managed to play around it a little bit using Cosmojo to take out my Moulin Glacia during my standby phase. I was thinking that I couldn't go into my battle phase. I then used System Down. He made a couple of plays that left him with a tin can on the board using Call of the Haunted, just to make sure that he didn't get, that he had something set up for next turn, but he didn't realize that I could just blow through it anyway. So that was that game. I ended up 2-0ing him, which was pretty surprising. Round 3 was my ABC matchup. I went 1-2. Game 1, I Maxx'd him, and he stopped with A and B and gold on the board. I used Twin Twisters to hit his back row. I went Neptabyss plus Instant Fusion to make Dweller with Megalo and Sphere, and it was just an absolute blowout game 1. Game 2, I opened System Down, and he opened Macro Cosmos. I really did not expect Macro Cosmos to be hitting in that matchup, because it hurts him almost as much as it hurts me, but I just had no plays that I could make with Macro on the board, so he won that game, even though I had the System Down, and my deck played normally, in theory, as well as it possibly could have, and really well. If he didn't have the Macro Cosmos, I would have been in great shape, and I would just not expect an ABC player to be playing Macro. Game 3, I made a fairly major misplay, which is that my deck has a really good turn 1 against ABC because of Abyss Sphere. If I can get Abyss Sphere and Infantry in my hand, I can stop his Xyz play before he can make it. And I had Twin Twisters and Abyss Sphere on the board after my turn 1. And when he was going, he activated Union Hanger, and I could have waited and should have waited to use the Abyss Sphere to infantry off an Xyz monster that he summoned, because I was reading that he didn't have Twin Twisters, which was correct, but I prematurely Twin Twisters and he had back row during the end phase, one of which turned out to be Macrocosmos again. And so I lost that matchup. Round 4, I went 0-2 against Odd Eyes. I bricked 2 games in a row. He was a guy I knew at locals, so he made me go first. Game 1, and I just could not set up a good enough play. I thought that Abyss Gaios plus an Abyss Scale of the Mizuchi would do me pretty well, but he blew through those pretty darn easily because he was playing Odd Eyes Magician, and he got Vortex on the board just like immediately, essentially. And so he got through that very easily. In Game 2, I just drew spells, which is a major issue that this deck can run into. Round 5, I 2-0'd Kaiju Trains. He went first and opened Rail Cannon both games, and I blew through it. I had a clutch Ogre that took out the Rail Cannon during my standby phase when he activated it, but other than that, he did a lot of Kaiju shenanigans, but my deck just had more plays to be made. Round 6, PK Fire, I 2-0'd him. I actually didn't see any Dragoons Game 1, but I did have Slumber, I did have the access to rank 7s, I had Instant Fusion, which allowed me to make Abyss Dweller, which was really big, and then even bigger, I had the Soul Charge that allowed me to go into Trishula later in the game. So that was really big. And then Game 2, he kept Fogblading things, but I could get around it both because of Twin Twisters and because the most important cards in my deck, their cost is the important thing about playing them. And so that didn't make a huge difference. Round 7, I went 2-1 against Metal Foes. Game 1, he went Spark and Jowgen, which my deck just cannot play around, which is a reason why I might want to play Book of Eclipse in the main deck in the future. Game 2, he opened with Raya, which would have been really big, except I had a ton of plays that could run around it. I just kept summoning bigger monsters than Raya and forcing him to either hit that monster with a trap card or eventually drop the Ryo. And Game 3, I just destroyed everything he knew and loved, and he had a Jowgen play that he had set up, and I had the Clutch Strike. Solemn Strike really came in clutch there because he had nothing else besides the Jowgen play, and I had all special summon monsters and then the Solemn Strike, and that strike made a huge difference because he could just activate the Jowgen's effect, and I ended up having to negate it. And rounds 8 and 9, I went 2-1 against Blue Eyes both rounds. When I lost, it was from big boards, and then they OTK'd me. Swords of Concealing Light was amazing in that matchup because they'd set up boards like 2 Spirit and like a Crystal Wing or something like that. I hit the Swords of Concealing Light, and this is why I ran Marksman at 2, is because I could just slam out those monsters and then run over the others with Megalo, and he could not recover. And the last round, I was actually playing against a good friend of mine from back in Vancouver, and he was crazy sportsmanlike, because at the very end of the game, I had 7,000 life points, and he went for an alternative dragon play. He popped my Megalo with a scale attached to it, and he attacked with both his Crystal Wing and his alternative, but he couldn't have attacked with alternative that turn. And so he had me go back and show him the hand that I had, and show him the play that I would have made the next turn. And it turned out that I had Soul Charge, which could have first gone into Castel, which I would have targeted the Crystal Wing with, which he would have then negated, and I would have big-eyed the Crystal Wing or the alternative dragon, and then proceeded to win from there. So that was the tournament report. There were a couple of moves that I could have done better, namely that move against ABC, but I just wanted to let you know how the deck played out against its matchups, what my matchups were, and to show you a little bit of what it's like for me when I analyze a tournament afterward to make sure that I can do better the next time. I'm going to be talking a lot about competitive play in the near future once I start really getting into videos again, and one of the things I just really encourage players to do is try and play as competitively as possible at regionals, even if you're a casual player, because of how much better it makes you at the game and how much more it makes you enjoy the game once you go back to being a casual player. Anyway, that's my tournament report. I hope you all liked this video. If you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you didn't, let me know why in the comment section below. Of course, subscribe for more decks discussion, analysis, and general Yu-Gi-Oh! Shenanigans. Thank you all for watching. I am your host, the one, the only, the RJB0, and I got a jet. See you guys.